After a Wall Street Journal report on the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, the president is now asking the DOJ to release any pertinent grand jury testimony from this case. Joining us now is former U.S. District Court Judge Shira Scheindlin. Judge, great night to have you. Thank you very much for being here. We were just discussing, what would a judge do? So what do you think? I mean, how hard is it to release grand jury testimony?
Well, there's a high bar, but it's not hard in the sense that the judge looks at it, the judge decides whether it's pertinent. But the question I had is listening to you, pertinent to what? What are we talking about here? Pertinent to what is the big question. I think that's what Judge Berman, Richard Berman, who was my colleague for many years, that's what he's going to be thinking. Now what is it pertinent to? Look, it seems to me, and I didn't hear all of this earlier conversation, but this is a self-made problem. The Republicans campaigned on releasing it all because it was a big conspiracy, and they were going to let it come out so the public would know. And all of a sudden, when it's time to come out, after the Attorney General said it's on my desk, suddenly there's nothing there to release. So there's certainly a public interest on one side, but there's a privacy interest on the other. There are witnesses, there are victims. That could be redacted, so you could release some statements and redact others, which means black them out. For people who didn't know what redact means, you can take things out and release it in that form. So if I were a speculating person, I think something will get released of the grand jury minutes. Now, I think, as I heard on the last segment, most of the material is not grand jury material. So there's still a decision that somebody's making to release or not release. And that's not up to the judge.
Can I ask a question of the judge? In a case like this, does the court have to give an opportunity for people who may be mentioned in that transcript to come and object to this?
No, I think the judge would consider that privacy interest and would probably redact. Look, the person at the center of it is dead. Yeah. We have to recognize that. This is in a way such old news, but it's self-made harm. It's self-inflicted.
What marks pertinence? They said that's the key question.
I said that.
What do you weigh there?
No, I don't know, because I'm not quite sure of the answer of pertinent to what.
Public interest. You raised the phrase public
and
interest.
there is also Ghislaine Maxwell, who is alive.
True.
She's not
That's
dead.
True.
And she is in prison because of her role in
Well, she has a case pending before the Supreme Court.
Well,
so could she object to it, saying it could hurt my case?
She could, but they haven't taken her case. I think it's a cert petition. I don't know that she's agreed yet to hear this appeal. It would be unlikely, frankly, that they would take it. What's the legal issue that's of interest to the court? So,
and Judge, you mentioned that there are people that could. Maybe this is not released because the people still have to be protected. But what about the President of the United States? Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Yes, the person who is at the center of this case. But if it involves the President of the United States, the sitting president, how does that impact what's released?
If there's something in the grand jury testimony that might in some way impact him, that's something that the judge would have to consider in both directions. In other words, does the public have a right to know what his involvement was? I mean, we seem to know an awful lot about it already, right? We've seen his picture every night as a young man with Jeffrey Epstein. We now hear his letters, his birthday cards, or all the rest of it. So we know a lot about the relationship.
With us now, CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig. The president tells the Attorney General Pam Bondi to ask a court for the release of pertinent grand jury testimony. Why is the word pertinent important here, Elie?
Well, pertinent's doing an awful lot of work there, John. First of all, just grand jury testimony itself is only going to be a fairly small fraction of the entire file. In addition to that, we now have this word pertinent. And so that begs the question, pertinent to what? And pertinent as determined by who? So it gives the Attorney General, in some respect, wiggle room, but it also puts her in a very difficult position where apparently she's going to have to A, decide what's pertinent, and then B, you have to go in front of a federal judge and get permission to release grand jury materials. So there's a lot of hurdles still in place here.
What is the difference between calling for the release of pertinent grand jury material and calling for the release of all investigatory information in the Jeffrey Epstein case, which is what some Republicans and the president's own supporters have long been calling for?
So there's a massive difference there, John. So if you think of the entire file here, and by the way, we know from last week's FBI memo that this is a huge file, 300 gigabytes of information. That's millions and millions of pages of documents. You can sort of separate it into two perceptual categories. There's grand jury materials. Those are presumptively confidential. By law, you cannot turn them over to the public as a prosecutor unless you get a judge's permission first. But then there's all the rest of it. That's something that the president, the attorney general, can decide on their own without going through a judge first and say, I'm going to release this. And so what the president has done here is said, I only want to focus on the narrow category, the grand jury stuff, that you first have to go to a judge for. As to all that other stuff, the majority of the file, that is entirely up to the AG and the president. If they want to release that today, they can do that.
Has been under enormous pressure from his base, the loudest voices in his party who've criticized his administration over its handling of the Epstein situation. Now they're rallying to his defense over this Wall Street Journal story. And so it gave him at least a little bit of breathing room when it comes to his base. Those people now saying the Wall Street Journal was unfair to have published this story.
Gabe, the president tried to tell people, stop talking about Epstein. Now he's pushing to release grand jury testimony. That's quite a change. Why the flip-flop?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Anna. Again, I just spoke with a senior administration official a short time ago, and this person was trying to make the case that it actually wasn't that big of a change, although the language did change in his post. He's now saying he's asking the Attorney General to do it, whereas before he had been saying the whole decision was up to her and it wasn't up to him. And he said, oh, if she wanted to release any credible information, she should do it. It's unclear whether he did have any sort of conversation with the Attorney General yesterday. She, of course, was out on the West Coast attending or touring Alcatraz yesterday. So we're trying to find out more information whether they did have any sort of conversation. But yes, the president last night in that social media post now saying that he is asking the Attorney General to release any pertinent grand jury information. And as your guest just said, pertinent can mean a lot of things, and that the word really is doing a lot of work right here. It could be that anything that is not pertinent. Who decides what is pertinent? Who decides what is credible? And certainly this could be just the start of a process here. Pam Bondi saying she will move to start this, but this might not happen very quickly. We'll just have to see how this all plays out.
I mean, Alex, if this whole idea of getting grand jury testimony goes nowhere, because as Lisa pointed out, it seems unlikely a judge is going to allow grand jury transcripts to get out there. What does this mean in terms of satisfying the base?
It won't do much to satisfy the base. It will give Trump someone else to deflect blame to, but you're still going to see members of the Trump's coalition calling for more information to be released. One of the really interesting dynamics here is that you're seeing conservative voters are saying that they want to see more information released, and because conservative voters asking for information released, that means that puts pressure on House Republicans, other Republican members of Congress, to put pressure on the White House, because these people don't want to face primary challenges. They don't want to antagonize their base of voters, and so they're under pressure as well to speak up on this issue.
Dave, there was also a push by Trump allies, including members of Congress, to have a special counsel be applied here, and yet the White House has already ruled that out. What do you think? Would this type of a case warrant a special counsel?
Perhaps in another administration, but you're talking about President Trump, who values loyalty over everything else, and he has an attorney general in Pam Bondi who is loyal to him. Why would he take it out of her hands and give it to someone else? Remember when President Clinton had Whitewater and they had a special counsel who stepped in, Kenneth Starr, and Whitewater then became Monica Lewinsky. And so it really rarely ends well when a president appoints a special counsel, or at least the attorney general does. Don't expect that to happen here.
Lisa, where do you see this going? What other options? If no grand jury testimony comes out, if there's no special counsel, what's left?
I think that still Pam Bondi has the option to release additional materials. But, both sides are playing political football with the Epstein files without really talking about what is likely to be in them. And we know already that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of videotapes, still images of Jeffrey Epstein with his underage victims. We know that there is likely documentation that goes to the heart of their privacy and their rights. I really wish that, despite the insatiable public curiosity about what happened, that people would understand that Department of Justice under President Trump in 2019 in indicting Jeffrey Epstein and then following his death, Ghislaine Maxwell, took a look at all of that evidence. If there was more there that could have led to other indictments, I believe that a Department of Justice under Joe Biden would have looked again at that evidence and indicted people. I want to make one other point, though. I want to underscore the fact that Pam Bondi cannot release any grand jury transcripts on her own. She needs judicial permission to do so. In some courts around the country, you have to fit into certain exceptions to the federal rule that governs grand jury transcripts to do it. This situation doesn't fit into any of those exceptions. Dave and I were talking about it before we came on the air. But in this area of the country, the circuit court that oversees the Southern District of New York, you can have them released if there are special circumstances. So let's wait to see what the Department of Justice says those special circumstances are in their court papers.
Just very quickly, Dave, how quickly could that happen?
The
For
release
the
of grand jury.
to look at it and to weigh in.
Well, I do think the district court will weigh in and probably will reject it. And then Trump will rail on the courts and he'll get caught up in appeals. But he will get what he wanted, which is to deflect his base onto the judiciary, blame them, blame the press. Just don't blame the president.
Here's what's happening in my opinion. Now, this is, my opinion, my estimation. I've been right before. I'm not always right, of course. That's why there's question marks in the title and whatnot. But this is what you call getting ahead of the story, getting ahead of it. Because Trump senses he's losing support in Congress on this. Trump is getting a sense that Democrats are able to poach a few Republicans. And given how close the House is especially, there is a path to a majority where, all the Democrats effectively and, a few dozen Republicans could easily have a majority in the House on this issue and really put pressure on Johnson. And you've even seen Johnson at times sounding like a coward, but then another time sort of pressuring the president, saying you need to give us some transparency here. So Trump is trying to release some of the documents so that Congress doesn't release all or most of the documents, right? So Trump is like, fine, I'm going to instruct Pam Bondi to look at what she can release and then look at the legality of all of it and then release anything quote unquote pertinent, which is translation for what Trump thinks is important, or more accurately than that even, hide the stuff that makes Trump look bad and release the stuff that is either benign or makes his political enemies look bad. Somebody he could scapegoat. And so take this as a sign that Trump is losing. Because what he's effectively saying is, I know that if I don't do anything now, the floodgates are going to burst open. So I'm going to release a little bit of a pressure valve and drop just enough info to get people off my back. But I want you to remember that if you don't get a full release or like a very close to full release, the real stuff will still be hidden.